A lot of the tracce from Lombardy mentioned the ESCS index. What is this and how does it influence our lesson plan? I've gotten a few questions about this and I've merged them kind of into this question. What is it? The Economic, Social and Cultural Status Index is a PISA index that measures the economic, social and cultural status of pupils, of school students. Okay, so it's you can think of it as their background, their socioeconomic and cultural background, which of course can bring us back also to that idea of svantaggio that we have in the Direttiva BES. And in some tracce, we have seen things like, in Lombardy, things like, this is the topic of the lesson, teach it to this particular class with one student or two students with DSA, with specific learning differences, and medium high ESCS index level, or low blah 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 index. What does this mean? So how do we factor that into our decisions for our lesson plan? How do we make it clear that we have considered this when drafting our lesson plan and when ideally we would teach our lesson plan? Some of the possible impacts of socioeconomic and cultural status include the following. The following list comes from obviously what PISA says, some research also, and yeah, from what the PISA analyses say, and some research as well. I am sometimes a bit skeptical about this because I feel like SEC, socioeconomic context, or ESCS, the way that PISA calls it, it can be an unfair variable to look at when we look at academic achievement, but it can stigmatize some kids. So I don't necessarily agree with all of this. However, if they've put it in the tracce, it's because I feel like they want you to think about it. Possible impacts of this variable. First of all, access to technology. So if you've got a low index, you may have kids that don't have as much access to technology. So are you going to be doing the BYOD policy, the bring your own device policy? And if so, is it phones? Most people have phones these days, but is it laptops? Because not all kids have access to their own laptop, and so on and so forth. Availability of study space at home and free time. Do all kids have a space where they can study at home? Do they have the free time to study at home? Some kids have to work. Or some kids have to take care of parents. Some kids are caretakers as well. They may have disabled parents. They may have parents that require their help in different ways. So these are things you may want to consider when it comes to things like using the flipped classroom, how much homework you give, and how crucial that homework is to the development of your following lesson. When you give homework, do you also have a stage in the following lesson in which you allow people to catch up, in which you allow students to catch up if they haven't done the homework? Is that homework assessed? Is that homework assessed summatively? You know, all of these questions I think you need to bear in mind if they've told you that the economic, social, cultural status is low. Kids may have different levels of parent support and parents' availability to come and talk to you if there are issues, for example, with their behavior. They may have the parents' support to do their homework. This can create inequality between your students. On a very extreme, but sadly sometimes true level, you might want to consider the impact of malnutrition and sleep deprivation on your students' emotional well-being and cognitive performance. Obviously, like I say, extreme situations, but still things to be aware of. When they say that the index is low in the area in which you're working, you've got to be thinking about the resources of the schools, because statistically, schools located in areas with a low ESCS index have fewer resources. So when you plan your lesson, are you relying 100% on, for example, an interactive whiteboard? Is there going to be a language lab? Is there going to be a school subscription to software, to magazines, to streaming services? You may want to think about these things when you plan your lesson, and kind of allow for the possibility that these things may not be there, or that if they're not there, or if they falter, like if they break, or if they're not 100% reliable, you'll have another option. You'll have a hard copy, for example, of a text or a quiz that you were going to show on the interactive whiteboard. Students may have fewer opportunities for traveling, for cultural exchange. So obviously something to keep in mind when it comes to language learning, particularly. Financial constraints of your to your students, to what your students can do. So which tools are you going to use? I know that some people give homework that, for example, is to do with watching an episode on Netflix, where you can't necessarily know that the kids are going to have access to Netflix, for example. There's also some research that suggests that kids from the kind of disadvantaged, I don't like the terminology, but disadvantaged family backgrounds have lower motivation for learning, which is something you may want to obviously factor in when you're drafting your lesson plan. Are you going to need to show your learners the relevance of what they're doing for their future? Are you going to be actively fostering a sense of motivation in your students? Are you going to take their interests into consideration when designing your activities? Because this can foster motivation. Higher dropout rate. This is another big topic. Just something that you may want to keep in mind, depending on the context that you'll be working with. But there is also some research, and PISA, I think, mentioned it as well, that kids from these kind of environments tend to have a higher dropout rate. Also, some research suggests that a low ESCS correlates with higher chances of learning behavior issues and with lower reading abilities. And also, you always have to consider the intersection of coming from this kind of background and other issues. So, coming from these background may exacerbate other factors such as disabilities or behavioral issues, anxiety, specific learning difficulties. So how do they interact? What is the interplay between these factors? And how does that influence your lesson plan? How does that influence the inclusion measures that you implement in your lesson plan? Which is another big topic, as you know.